Hello, my name is Mike. Welcome to my personal channel. Today we're going to talk about why I moved out of California, more specifically Southern California in Los Angeles. A few years back, I lived in Los Angeles and I had moved there with my then girlfriend to LA. It was great in the beginning. We were excited. She was an actress, so she was in the Hollywood and show biz. It was a way for her to pursue her career. I was working on a video startup and it was a way for me to pursue that as well. Now, if you've ever lived in Los Angeles, some of the things that I'm going to talk about you may be able to relate to. And if you are currently living in Los Angeles, or perhaps Los Angeles is your hometown, you may get offended by some of the things that I'm going to talk about, but this is my truth, and I'm making this video perhaps for anyone who's curious, or if you are thinking about moving to the state of California, and more particularly the city of Los Angeles. So to prove my point, I'm going to talk about the things that I loved about the city of Los Angeles and the things that I hate and that eventually led me to move out of there. First, when you think of LA, if you've ever been there, the geography to me is, you can't really compare it to anywhere else in the country, even the world. Los Angeles has mountains all around. You've also got the beaches. And if you are someone who loves you're that type of person that you take a moment just to absorb nature, you're gonna appreciate that, especially during sunset. Like, I would think of days where I'm driving later in the night and I would just stare up. I would look up and I'm surrounded by mountains. It's beautiful to look at. Although you do not want to get caught in LA traffic ever. Nothing can steal your joy faster than LA traffic. But the geography with mountains and the beaches is amazing. The next thing is the weather. LA is notorious for having just amazing weather all year round. You can be in warmth literally from January all the way to December. Also, another unique thing about Los Angeles is you can have summer on one side and winter on another side at the same time. This is true. Say for example, you travel up north to Big Bear, you've got snow on top of the mountain so you can go skiing. And you travel a little bit further back north, you've got the water, the beaches. You go to Santa Monica, for example, Long Beach, you're surrounded by water and warmth. That's one of the most unique things about being in LA, is that you have best of both worlds. Also, living in Los Angeles, they have a culture of healthy lifestyle. And I think that goes in sync with the Hollywood and show business. Everybody wants to live young forever. But as just the average citizen, if you're living there, you also become conscious about your health. I know I did. Things that I didn't think about or worry about before. Living in LA, I started to think about food that I eat, my lifestyle in general. So it would do that to you. And for some that may be a bad thing, but I think ultimately it's a great thing when you're more conscious about your health. So living healthy, eating good food. You don't have to be a vegan or vegetarian. I'm not one, but you become conscious about things that you're eating. Also, part of that is that living in LA, I had a more outdoorsy lifestyle, meaning I got out more. That's partly due to the weather, but when I think about everywhere else that I've lived, more particularly New York, I didn't go out much. I would only go out in New York at night to go party or to the club back in the day. But other than that, I was inside for the most part. And also it gets cold in New York. But in LA, because of the warm weather all year round, you tend to be outside more. Like, I would go to the park, I would go play tennis, soccer. I had a team that I played with every weekend, and so I never had that living anywhere else in the world. And I think that's a great thing ultimately, and it also attaches to that healthy lifestyle living. So you've got that. And the last and what I loved most about Los Angeles is aviation. If you're into flying, whether you're a pilot or aspiring pilot, or you just love airplanes, Los Angeles is the place to be. It's like the mecca of aviation to me. When you think of general aviation, because of the weather, you barely get any thunderstorms or clouds when you're living in LA. Now, it does happen, and sadly you have yearly fires in LA, but for the most part, the sky is just open for you to fly. And I enjoyed a lot of that living in Los Angeles. And I would encourage anybody else who is thinking about moving there, if you are looking to fly, that box is already checked. So you're gonna love it if you lived in Los Angeles. So these are the things that I loved loved about the city. Now, let's talk about the things that ultimately led me to move out of the city of Los Angeles. I mentioned the culture of the healthy living and outdoors lifestyle, but another culture that LA has is Hollywood. Hollywood is huge, obviously, in the city of Los Angeles. The culture is not necessarily healthy. At least that's the way I saw it. So by Hollywood culture, I mean you would meet people, you would want to be genuine to people and try to build relationships. What I noticed people would do is they would paint this picture of themselves of who they want you to see, not necessarily who they were. And so you had a lot of people who were driving nice cars that they could afford, or trying to live up and build the stories of who they were and they were not. I'll give an example. Oftentimes you would meet people in LA who would be driving a car that cost $100,000, $250,000, and they have a roommate. Or they can't afford to really pay the rent, or they live in somebody's basement, or they live in their parents' house. But again, you have this culture where you have to show off. At least I think that's what they think, is that you have to show off and you have to paint this image of being successful. And what I see often is that it drowns people, and it also gives this persona of you dependent on everybody's opinion to make you feel good about who you were. I didn't mix well with that. And what I saw for me was when I would try to build relationships, either personal or business relationships with people, I would get this different side of who they wanted me to see, not who they were. And so relationship built on a lie would not work out. And so I saw a lot of that, and that didn't rub me the right way. Now, I also mentioned the weather in Los Angeles. The weather in LA is great, but it's also an excuse for it to be stupid expensive. Now, being that I lived in New York, I actually moved from New York to LA. These are the best two cities that I can compare. Living in New York is also quite expensive, but I think for the amenities that you get in New York, it's far better than what you get in LA. And I may be a little biased, but let me explain. In LA, you have the rent is pretty expensive when you compare to the national average. Also, cost of living in terms of your groceries. Oil prices is expensive because everybody drives. New York, for example, when you look at the geography of New York, it's a good city in terms of the transit system is built. So you can take the bus or the train to just about anywhere. But living in LA, because of the geography where there's mountains everywhere, it's hard to build an efficient transit system. You have the public bus transportation, but it's not as efficient as what you would have in a metro area like New York. So what that translates to is that if you wanted to get anywhere in Los Angeles, you either have to have access to a car or you needed to own a car yourself. And so because of that, you also had a high demand for gas. You got to fuel up the car. And because of that, gas prices is just out of this world. When you compare the average cost for a gallon of fuel in LA, it's about double the national average. So you've got that. So living expenses, transportation, food. I think the groceries is pretty comparable to anywhere else you would live. In some cases, actually, maybe even cheaper to shop for groceries in LA, but still expensive nonetheless. You've got all those things, and then the ultimate big elephant in the room is the tax. Los Angeles and California taxes is ridiculous, especially if you're a business owner. When you're a business owner, you are literally in 50-50 partnership with the government, the local government there, and possibly the federal government. That's the only place I know or that I've lived in where your taxes is literally 50% of what you make. Los Angeles or California is also one of the few states where whether you make money or not in your business, you still have to pay taxes. There's a minimum amount of, as long as your business is active in their database, you have to pay some taxes. So the taxes can get crazy, especially when you start making a lot of money. But again, if you can justify it with the weather and the mountains and the beaches, then that's great. But for me, I couldn't. The main thing that really broke the camel's back for me when I lived there was the homeless community in LA. I mentioned the fact that LA can get expensive compared to other cities. And again, New York is the best place I can compare it to. What I found is that in New York, for example, you can be paying, say the average rent is $1,600 or $1,700 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. But what you get is the amenities of being able to move from place to place. You also have, in my opinion, better culture in terms of a community that really can help you foster your growth, whether in business or just in your personal life. I had that living in New York. But in LA, it's just as expensive, but you don't get those things. And then when you think of the cost of living, you think of the homeless community in Los Angeles, and guys, it is devastating. I personally knew people who were homeless. I knew people where we would have lunch or hang out for a few minutes, and I knew that they were going back on the streets or in their cars to sleep for the night, and I was going to my warm bed. That's how close it was, and I don't think I can picture that in any other city. When I think of the homeless community in LA, it's really bad, and it's not a problem that's getting easier, it's getting worse. And Los Angeles is one of the few places in the world where you would see a homeless person and you think to yourself, that dude or that lady probably has a college degree. So it's not your typical homelessness. It's literally people who could not afford to either rent a place or buy a place in Los Angeles. I'll give you an example. If you were making $100,000 a year anywhere else in America or around the world, chances are you're living a pretty comfortable life, even better than, say, the average. But in Los Angeles, $100,000 a year does not get you far. After you've paid your rent or your mortgage, you pay your car payments, all together, all your costs of living, you would see that you're barely surviving in LA on $100,000. And I know a few people where that was the case. And again, when you think of that lifestyle of, showing off like you're doing something, it really catches up to you. So when you look at that for somebody who is homeless, except they get an opportunity that really changes their life circumstances, chances are they will remain homeless. One of the few experiences I had in LA, again, knowing people who are homeless, is when you think of the homeless population in LA, a lot of it also are people who are not necessarily from LA. There are people who moved from other parts of the country to come to Los Angeles. Either they came to try to make it in Hollywood, or they came to try to explore what they could do with their talents. Long story short, they would find themselves, they spent a year or 2 years living in LA, and what they thought was going to be their dream come true did not happen. Instead of them going back home to reorganize, be around family, and think of what they need to do next, they'd rather stay in Los Angeles. They'd rather stay and be homeless on the streets or live in their cars. You may have heard of popular celebrities. You have Steve Harvey, even Halle Berry, talk about how once upon a time I was homeless. And so when you have these big celebrities glorifying homelessness, of course, people who are behind and trying to make it to that level of success, they're gonna count it as part of the process. It's like, I have to be homeless to be successful in Hollywood. And in my opinion, that should not be the case. You shouldn't have to live on the streets for you to become successful someday. It could make a good story in the long run, but I choose not to adopt that. So this is ultimately what led me to decide to move out of Los Angeles. When I think of all of the costs put together and what I was getting for that cost, it was not cost effective. And then when I think also of the culture, I didn't fit in with that culture. It didn't sit well with me knowing people who were homeless and could not afford to have their own place. And again, these were not people who were on drugs or anything. They just could not afford to have a place. So for me, all of that together, I was like, nope, I can't live here. But ultimately, it was the cost of living and the culture of Hollywood. It didn't fit right with me, and that's why I moved out of Los Angeles. But for some of you watching, this is all the things that I mentioned fit right up your alley. And I honestly think that if you've never been to Los Angeles, or California for that matter, you should definitely visit, even for a vacation. I think you're gonna have a great time there. But if you do decide to move there and to live there, I would seriously consider some of these things that I mentioned in the video. Okay? I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to give a thumbs up if you did. And also, if you love these type of stories and more about business and money, make sure you subscribe to the channel with the notification bell on. Again, my name is Mike. Thank you for spending time with me, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace.